Welcome everybody. So today we have a brief video as we talk a little bit about what's going on here in the course, answer some questions, and most of all, we're just giving you a little bit more time to work on a current lab so everybody does not get overwhelmed. We do have some very challenging material. I want to make sure you have adequate time to deal with that. So I have extended the due date for our current Lab 5. We still have quite a few people working on Lab 5, so I have extended that. There's still about 10 people or 5 groups approximately that are working on Lab 4, although that's hard to say. Some people may have also just submitted it as part of a group assignment. So, but either way, this judgment is based on Lab 5. I want people to have time to deal with that, so I have adjusted the time frame, and you can see I've moved it to the 19th, so the end of the weekend, and then you get the grace period. Now we'll have a new lab that will come out early next week. That'll be probably 20th, 21st, so deal with our shell coding. And then we should have one more lab. So we have 2 additional labs, so keep going strong. We want to finish up those labs and then continue to move forward. So we'll have one lab that'll deal with shell coding, and then another one which will probably be a combination of ROP and egg hunter, which is a specialized type of shell code. Part of what I wanted to also do was to give you some very specific tangible help with your ROP. Now what I'm talking about now is something that I have mentioned before, but it's been a while, and at that stage we were just learning what ROP was, so it's understandable if you may not recall. Now if we encounter something like a return, we're very used to that. But what happens when we have a return followed by a hex number, a hex op4, or not op4, but hex 4, hex 8, hex C, hex 10? How does our ROP chain behave in response to that? Some of you may have been confronted with the issue that when you use something like return 4, some of your input disappears. So you may have had an address for a gadget that would follow, and it's not hit. It disappeared. And that has confused some people. But what this does is this consumes bytes. So it will take off of the stack 4 bytes that follow. So 4 bytes is a D word, 2 bytes is a word, an address for our gadget is a D word or 4 bytes. So if I had something like a return 4, then, and I wanted to address that and not have it consume my next gadget, so say that hypothetically this was my next gadget and I didn't want it to magically disappear, what I would do was I would go like that. That would be the filler. Right here I have hex C. If you don't know what C is, that's fine. We can always go to our calculator. And a good easy way to do that if you're unsure is you can type the digit and then go to decimal, and we see that it's 12. So in 12, we got to think in terms of D words. So alignment is important. So we would have 3 different gadgets. So we could just divide that by 4. We get 3. So 3 things of filler that we would need to take care of this. If, say, hypothetically, I wanted this to be my next line. We would also need to take in consideration the pops here, which we're just conveniently ignoring the pops. So the pop also will consume things as well. But I think that is something that we're pretty well familiar with at this point. I also wanted to specifically comment on some of these different issues here. We need to make sure to address these fully in order for our for our code to work, our exploit to work. So what we have here is we have the need to get the push add onto the stack. If you look for push add, you do a search for it, you won't find it in Skin Magic. You'll find it in the image executable itself. The image executable itself starts with a null byte. If we have a null byte, then that'll truncate our input. We can't go forward. So as I mentioned before, and I think we talked about this in a video as well, we need to adjust and manipulate values in EAX or some other register such that it points to a push add instruction. Once we get the push add instruction how we want it, we make sure it's in EAX, so we could be doing the adjustments in EAX itself, or we could move it on over to EAX. At this point, we also need to dereference it. So because we're not doing something like jump dereferenced, I'm going to pull this up here. Because we're not doing something like jump dereference EAX, where EAX is pointing to the dereferenced of course I just made that up, dereference virtual protect. We're not doing this. That's not part of the plan for how this push add implementation works. So that means since the dereferencing is not implicit in how this is set up, we need to explicitly dereference it. So we need to dereference it how it exists currently in EAX. And we've talked about this already in one of our videos. So this is just a refresher here. We also need to take a look at EBP. So with EBP, we need to be cognizant of the fact that when we actually do get the push add, that so say for instance, your push add is an EAX, you do push EAX ret, that causes the push add to be executed, but as part of that, it also will again push add onto the stack because it's contained inside EAX. So how can we avoid hitting push add again? The secret here is we can make an adjustment to our EBP. So for that value, that return value, we could have something, rather than just allowing it to be automatic, we could have add ESP some trivial value to overcome push add, or just some trivial value to jump over that so we can then reach our NOP sled. So these are certainly some interesting and important considerations to have as we do our ROP here. This is not necessarily a simple ROP, and we're obviously not following what was prescribed to us by Milna. And there is one final piece to the puzzle in terms of getting this exploit to work, utilizing the technique that we're using, which is this it? Yeah. So we're using this technique right here, which we've already discussed. When we're done with this, we then need to get to our code, meaning our shell code, our NOP sled, and so we can have our ROP chain there. Might as well make this a plus. So we have this preset ROP chain variation of it, And once that's done, once we do the push add, we go to virtual protect. It's already been dereferenced for us. We make the call to virtual protect. Then how do we get our shellcode to execute? So you will run into some problems. One way in which we can do this, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is we can find a way to redirect our code or our execution to the NOP sled or to the shellcode. So in order to do that, you got to think in your mind, how are some ways in assembly where I can redirect control flow to a particular register? So it could be a register that holds the current location on the stack where you wish to go. So we got to find one of those, and then you need to find a way to get that to be executed. So memory, let's do this here. So we could think of this as a transfer of control flow. And this would need to be some gadget that gets a memory address pointing to NOP sled. Get it to be executed. How do we do that? As you can probably guess, I'm trying to be slightly vague by not saying too much. Part of this is I want you to figure this part out. So you get done with your ROP chain that executes correctly. You can do a command like vproc and then the location that you want to check. So we can just arbitrarily go like location, and that'll let you know if it's the desired RWX. So you can check after your ROP chain to see if you were successful. If you were successful, you still need to redirect control flow over to the NOP sled. So think about a way in which you could do that. Is there a particular gadget, some gadget that can do that? Keep in mind, ESP and EBP very often are going to be pointing somewhere close to our payload. Now, I'm not speaking specifically to this lab, but I'm speaking more generally, and this is for things where your payload ends up on the stack. If it ends up elsewhere, then, for instance, the heap, then that may not be the case. So I've given you a big hint by saying that ESP and EBP often will point to some location in the payload, and we want it to then point to our NOP sled. So, once you get that done, there's a little teeny bit of work in order to get the transfer over to our shellcode so we can get that to execute. So we do need to make sure that we fully complete the lab. And part of that is ensuring that the shellcode does execute. So I think this refresher here should be useful, and the additional information that I gave should work out well. Keep in mind to also include your Python script. I do take these, I do execute them. I do ask that you follow instructions and provide screenshots giving necessary information. So I don't recall if I requested it in this particular lab. I almost always do, but if I ask you to show that you were successful, then that means showing that you were able to execute a calculator, for instance, or whatever your shellcode was, and show something in the disassembly view of whatever debugger you're utilizing, showing that it was successful and it's executing those instructions as instructions. It's not trying to read it as an address or a gadget. And if you take something like a calculator and you just put it next to WinDebug and take a picture of that, then I would consider that to be cheating, and I would instigate an academic integrity on that. So we want to make sure that we are truthful in terms of how we represent our results, and that's partly why I asked you guys to include the scripts, because I do go through and check things, not always, but very often, and almost always when it's more complicated labs. Alright, thank you for watching today's video. I hope that I hope the course is rewarding. I hope that it is challenging, that it teaches you skills that will make you successful, not only in other classes you may take, such as 848, but more importantly, if you want to do this type of work yourself, you're aware of some of the modern approaches to exploitation, such as ROP. Not only just a simple implementation of ROP, but what do you do when something is a little bit more tricky? So this is not an easy class. Some of you have come into the class with perhaps not the most ideal background, but some of you have worked very, very hard to rise up above it. Rising up is the DSU way. And at the end of the day, then you have all these great skills and abilities, and you can do difficult things like what we're doing in this class. So hopefully the class is useful. I try not to water it down too much. Okay, so I hope you guys had a great weekend, and I look forward to working on some shell coding with you guys very soon.